I watched a ton of Daggerheart actual plays to see how famous GMs run combat, and what I found will shock you. Or maybe you'll find it mildly interesting. First off, I want to get one thing out of the way because I've seen a few creators and comments saying that Daggerheart combat is not faster than D&D combat. I've heard people say that it's the same, if not slower, and a lot of people using it to kind of attack Daggerheart. I don't want people who are new to the game to come in thinking that, because it's not true. The people who say this are GMs and players who are playing Daggerheart for the first time, or maybe second time, or even 10th time, but they've played D&D thousands of times. So it's not really a fair comparison. You understand one game so much more than the other. And if you're like me, you've spent years figuring out how to speed up D&D combat. Like, I have a lot of things in place that specifically make sure my players don't get as bored and pay attention, and that I take my goes as fast as possible. I have nowhere near that same kind of experience in Daggerheart and won't for a very long time. So I was bored and triggered. So I went through 5 different Critical Role Daggerheart episodes and timed the combat. Then went through 5 different Critical Role D&D episodes and also timed that combat. Now, this is unreliable because there are a lot of variables that can affect combat length, but the average Critical Role Daggerheart combat lasted around 50 minutes, and the average D&D combat lasted about 1 hour and 15 minutes. With the added time on the D&D combat mostly being due to rolling initiative, player indecision, and the table getting distracted and chatting. Player distraction does seem to just happen less in Daggerheart, which makes sense because the players are paying more attention because they can go at any point. They can also get attacked at any point. Players can't just zone out for 10 minutes because they know nothing's going to happen to them because they just took their go and the GM's go isn't for a while. You could have to do something in every second of a Daggerheart combat. You don't know. In a 10-minute period in D&D, there were an average of 5 turns, and in Daggerheart, an average of 6. So it is closer than you may think in the short term. 10 minutes of Daggerheart combat can look very similar to 10 minutes of D&D combat turn-wise. So it may not feel faster in the moment, but over long periods of time, it adds up. Of course, your table is not the Critical Role table, so results may vary. But I do think once players and GMs get more experience with Daggerheart, combat will start moving lightning fast. God knows my D&D combat is like 3 times faster compared to when I first started out. But yeah, looking at Critical Role, Daggerheart combat is faster, and in my own experience, Daggerheart combat is faster. I don't want to take away from you. Let me know in the comments if you have found it to be the same or slower, but that really is just where I stand right now. So with that out of the way, let's talk about Mark Hulmes from High Rollers, who does something I think really showcases the fact that there is not really a combat mode in Daggerheart, and that is that he will switch in and out of combat really easily. By this I mean at one point his players are split. 2 of them are lagging behind. One of them is in a separate area, and the remaining 2 are attacked. Attacked. So there's kind of 3 scenes going on. Mark describes the attack, spends fear, rolls to hit, and describes what happens next, as if in combat. But rather than being locked in that turn-based mode, he switches between the other scenes to work to get those players more involved. Now, I've done this with D&D, where mid-initiative we move to another player, not in the combat, to see what they are doing, but with Daggerheart, it is much more seamless. Adding to this, Mark makes sure the players understand that they have the spotlight until they roll with fear or miss, and that if they don't roll, then they keep the spotlight. His players then understand the assignment perfectly. One just got hit with an arrow, so they push the other player behind cover, pull the arrow out, and begin role-playing a Bonnie and Clyde style scene where they are under fire and trying to figure out how to get out of the situation. It's a really cool scene, and one I want to see play out. But Mark also does something great here. Since they're role-playing in this tense action scene, he spends fear to have the enemies maneuver around them and fire more shots at them. He ups the ante. This means this whole section of gameplay genuinely feels like a movie. A perfect mix of action and emotion, cutting between action, other scenes with the other characters, and emotional character development, all in the middle of combat. The scene then continues with the feeling that the adversaries are in combat with the players, but the players are trying to avoid it. And I think the best way to describe what Mark is doing here is that he's just treating running combat the same way he would run exploration or even a social encounter. And he's letting the players take the lead and reacting with how they want to play the game. He's just keeping the overall scene flowing rather than making it feel like time has frozen and you're in a Baldur's Gate 3 turn-based initiative where there's no time to talk or explore or create memorable moments. I hate to keep calling out D&D, but it is the closest thing we have to Daggerheart right now. But certainly when I've played D&D or DM D&D, when I go into combat with the players, the first thing they do is pick up their character sheet and start looking at all their mechanical skills and things they can do. It's almost like they forget that they can do anything in the game. There's something about combat that makes it like, okay, what buttons can I press? What are my abilities? And some people might prefer that. I'm not against D&D, I can't stress that enough. There are tables who will prefer that mechanical heavy, punchy, slower combat. But in Daggerheart, you have the chance to not lock in to that combat and instead explore an unlimited amount of options of how the players can progress this scene. Mark also does something super simple, but it's worth all GMs getting used to doing, and it's just keeping track of the players during combat and seeing who has not been for a while. And this can take a bit of practice. We're used to spotlighting quieter players outside of combat, but in combat, we're handling so much other stuff, it can be hard. But the more you GM, the better you will get at this. Whenever you think a player has not gone for a while or is getting spoken over by other players, at the end of the next person's turn or your own turn, just ask the quieter individuals if they would want to go next. Push them to the front of the queue. Even if another player is trying to take the spotlight, you can just say, well, hold on, player B has not been for a while. Would you like to do something, player B? And doing this will obviously mean the spotlight is shared more, but it also reminds the other players not to get too carried away with taking their turns and that there are other players at the table. And if you do this enough times, players will start following suit, and before you know it, players will be asking each other if they want to go next. I've started doing a thing after my turns as GM in Daggerheart, where instead of saying, okay, the spotlight is back to the players, who wants to go next, I say, okay, the spotlight is back to the players who feels like they've not been for a while. This makes all the players look around the table, and if someone genuinely feels like they've not been for a while, they can say, oh, me, and then it's your turn then. Okay, before we jump to how XP to level 3 runs combat, if you like this kind of Daggerheart content and want to see more, maybe even want some third-party material like homebrew items and subclasses, consider liking and subscribing to this video and checking out my Patreon, link in the description. I'm using the Patreon right now to fund these Daggerheart videos in particular, since I'm not putting sponsors on here, and every new paid member I get over there means a new Daggerheart video, until I burn out. Also, my headset broke, so I need to replace that. Okay, onto Jacob Buds from Arcane Arcade, who does something really cool in combat that I'm 100% stealing. And that is when it is his activation, his go as the GM, he does not always just spotlight an adversary to attack. He also sometimes spotlights the environment itself, having the environment change and put the players in more danger. And this environment move can either be caused by coincidence, oh, an avalanche randomly happens, what are the chances? Or it can be caused by an adversary or even by the players themselves by accident. Maybe the player succeeds on an attack with fear, they hit the enemy with their sword, but this makes a loud, clanging sound, causing an avalanche. I think this is so cool because it once again adds to the cinematic nature of this game, that the danger is not just from adversaries, but the environment itself. And you can plan this beforehand by putting together an environment stat block. It does not have to be too complex, just a handful of potential hazards in this environment and what happens if they're triggered. Some could just give stress, and some could potentially damage or restrain the players. The environment could also be a danger to the other adversaries themselves as well. Having the environment damage both the players and the adversaries at the same time also helps get rid of that idea that it's GM versus player and more consequences versus story. I think with Daggerheart, dangerous environments are going to become as memorable as the adversaries themselves, and I honestly cannot wait to either create more myself and put them on Patreon or see more come out from Darrington Press. Jacob will also, and I love this, ask his players to help him with the rules mid-combat. We are all new to this game. We cannot be expected to know everything. And when Jacob is unsure about something, his player looks it up in the core rulebook to double check for him. This means the GM can concentrate on other things and not slow the game down too much, and the player who is not doing much at the moment can now be incredibly useful. Now, not all players will enjoy helping out like this, but there are some players out there who love it. They enjoy looking up rules and being helpful, and if you have a player like that, utilize them. Okay, on to Matt Mercer. So one thing I've noticed Matt do, which I think will become obvious over time, but for now I feel like a lot of new players are still hung up on the fear mechanic, but Matt will still sometimes have a negative effect happen even if a player succeeds with hope. The core rulebook states that the GM can make a move when players roll with fear or fail an action roll, but also if they give you a golden opportunity, or they do something that would have consequences. In this specific example, during combat, one player uses a magic attack and succeeds with hope, but Matt still activates his enemy to roleplay the fact that this adversary hates the person who attacked him. This is because this particular adversary does not like the type of magic used against it. It's a whole thing, but it makes sense. Now, Matt doesn't take a full action here. He does not attack the player back, but he does move the scene and the combat forward narratively. If your players do something that would have consequences, even if they succeed with hope, the consequences should still happen. But one thing I will say is don't have it happen often, and try to make your players aware of potential consequences before they roll, because that's huge. Just because it won't be fun for them to still get some kind of negative effect after succeeding with hope. So next time your players try and do something and you're like, oh, are you sure? Because something bad will happen. Tell them that. Tell your player who wants to slap the king of this nation, even if he succeeds with hope, there will still be a consequence. The other thing Matt does in combat is use his resources. He never has full fear, but he also barely has no fear at all. He always tries to keep it in the middle, a sweet spot. And this is really smart, because he does not want to hoard fear. He wants to use it whenever he can, because, well, I mean, it's fun and it makes the combat more interesting for the players. But he always makes sure he has a little bit of fear left, emergency fear, if you will. This means he can always interrupt the player's go in an emergency. Say they just keep rolling with hope and decide to keep taking actions they don't have to roll for. It's also just not a nice position to be in when you have low to no fear. So always make sure you don't have too much or too little. For me, the sweet spot is around 4 or 5. If you have more, spend it. Less, start stockpiling. And the other thing Matt does, which I love, he never undermines the player's characters. You see, in combat, in Daggerheart, the players are probably going to miss or roll with fear most of the time. When this happens, the GM gets a go. But when describing how the character missed or what the consequence of the fear is, Matt never belittles the characters. Players don't miss or roll with fear because the characters are idiots. It's not because they're clumsy fools who don't know how to hit an enemy, which is honestly, it's tempting to be like that as a GM sometimes. But Matt is always a fan of his players' characters. It's not their fault they missed. It was an unfortunate random happenstance. The ground was uneven, or a strong wind picked up, or the adversary is just that good deflecting your attack, or you happen to hit a hard part of their armor. Can't be helped. There are unlimited ways to describe how and why a player character misses an attack, but you should always do it in a way that does not undermine the character and that actually maybe bigs them up and gives them a chance to have a visual idea in their head of how the fight is going. Something that everyone I looked at in this video did in their combat, and it's something talked about in the core rulebook, is layering in goals for your players. Whether that is to avoid a cave-in or simply get from one side of the map to the other before the time runs out, Daggerheart really encourages you to make some kind of secondary goal other than just kill the enemies before they kill you. These goals often use a countdown dice, which I spoke about in my last video about Daggerheart, but it truly is a way to add pressure and strategic thinking to an otherwise normal combat. And there is even a random objective table in the core rulebook, page 179, with some cool objective inspiration, like acquire an object, capture an opponent, destroy a piece of architecture, or my favorite, hold the line, which is a Helm's Deep situation where you need to stop the enemies getting past you. And just while we're talking about the core rulebook, it also has some other advice for keeping combat exciting, such as change up the battlefield. Maybe an environmental effect or an arcane effect changes the terrain in some way, or the adversaries change in some way. Maybe they have a second or third form, or maybe the arcane effect that affects the battlefield also affects your bad guy. Anyway, there's tons more I want to talk about in this game. I'm still discovering it all too, so this will not be my only Daggerheart combat video. But let me know in the comments if you have any useful Daggerheart combat tips, and thank you for watching.